Right then, so in this video, I'm going to be starting a new series on my channel, Great Western Transportation. In this series, I will be creating my very own travel guides to various places across the world. The reason why is because most travel guides you see online or in a book, such as Lonely Planet, they only ever mention the tourist stuff, the stuff that they think that most people will be interested in. However, my guides will be different. My guides will be for people who don't want to be sheep. This guide will be on London, so let's go! So, London. London is an incredible city. There's just so much character in London, I cannot emphasise that enough already. From the culture, to the food, to the architecture, to the scenery, to the sheer size of this wonderful city. London may only have 6 letters in its name, but its history dates back to the Romans, and its population is over 10 million as of 2023. London just simply feels like another country, if you compare it to the West Country, or the Yorkshire Dales for example. I've spent the first 7 years of my life living in the south of London. I've been to this city many times since I was born, so I believe that I have the knowledge to give you some tips and advice to visit the third most visited city in the world. Bangkok and Hong Kong are 2 and 1 if you're interested. So, first of all, before you even leave your house, you need to decide on how to get to this mega city. So, London has 6 airports: Heathrow, Gatwick, Stansted, Luton, City and Southend. Now, of those 6 airports, I would say only 4 of them are actually worth flying into. The other 2, Southend and City, are tiny, and to be honest, they probably won't serve any purpose for you. The other 4 airports are awesome airports, but it's important to know which one to fly into. Stansted to the northeast is usually the cheapest, as it's where Ryanair mainly flies to from continental Europe, but it's quite far away from London, and it can be extremely overpriced to get into London from there. In fact, the price of the train to get from Stansted to Liverpool Street can be more than the flights themselves. Madness. Luton, though, has good access to Thameslink, which is not too expensive, but the flights aren't as cheap to fly to Luton compared to Stansted, but it's still kind of cheap. It's mainly continental flights from Europe flying here. Gatwick and Heathrow are the 2 biggies, as those 2 airports are the only airports where you have transatlantic and Asian flights. Flying into Gatwick is a good option, as it's a lot cheaper than Heathrow. However, it is further away, but don't let that put you off. Unfortunately though, at Gatwick Airport, there is a lot of propaganda. You will encounter lots of advertising for the Gatwick Express, and please don't be fooled by this propaganda. It is ridiculously overpriced. I would say instead just catch a Thameslink train into London Bridge, then catch either the Jubilee or Northern Line from there, as Thameslink are a lot more affordable. Heathrow is obviously the big airport. Obviously though, flights therefore are a lot more expensive, but you may have no choice but to fly into Heathrow, and it's probably worth it considering London is such an awesome city. There's loads of ways to get into the centre of London from Heathrow, and I'll go through them one by one. 1. You got the overpriced Heathrow Express. Seriously, just avoid this. I don't get how on earth anyone would be happy to pay the £25 per person one way just to get to Paddington. Ridiculous. My advice would be to just to ignore the Heathrow Express. Just pretend it doesn't exist. Number 2, you got the new Elizabeth line. This also goes into Paddington, but it even continues further under the core of London, such as Bond Street, Tottenham Court Road, Farringdon and Liverpool Street. It only takes a little bit longer than the Heathrow Express to be fair, and it is part of the travel card, which I'll explain a lot more later on in this guide. And number 3, you've got the Piccadilly line. This is the slowest way to get into London, but you get to go on the underground, which is awesome. And again, I'll explain this later on in the travel guide. Now, if you live in France, you could go on the Eurostar, but that is dangerously overpriced, and same with the ferry. Okay, so I hope this clarifies any confusion or worries about getting into this mega city, and let's continue with this travel guide. Now that you've arrived into London, you'll probably be exhausted by the long flight and you'll probably need some sleep. So, where do you sleep? Well, my advice would be to go onto booking.com and honestly just find the cheapest hotel on there. that doesn't look dodgy, unhygienic, or dirty. And if you're like me and you hate dormitories, avoid them as well. The cheapest private room would be your best option. As a whole, hotels in London and the UK in general are top notch in terms of hygiene. I cannot fault it at all. I'm not saying that they all are hygienic, but all the hotels which I've been to, that I've stayed in, are 5 out of 5 hygiene. And they all seem to have that fresh hotel sort of smell. I don't know how to describe it, but I'm sure you may understand what I mean. You know, that hotel sort of smell. You know, the smell of coffee machines. I honestly don't know what I'm talking about. Let's just continue. Per night, you shouldn't have to spend more than about £30 to £40 per person per night, which is a little bit more expensive than normal in most cities, but I think it's totally worth it. And don't just put London into booking.com. Do search up boroughs surrounding the city, as they're a lot cheaper. Now, the majority of cheap hotels in London are either Holiday Inn or Travelodge. I 100% recommend Holiday Inn, as they are brilliant. I believe they also do proper breakfast buffets where you can experience a full English, I believe. I may be wrong there. All hotels should also have hot showers, private bathrooms, 24/7 reception service, a bar, a TV, and hopefully just a nice place to sleep. So, good morning, rise and shine. So, after that night, you'll actually want to start doing stuff around this city. So, what do? Well, personally, I actually recommend spending some time on the London Underground because I think it is by far the best metro system in the world. No exaggeration. Make sure to spend some quality time on each line as it's so worth it. You know, you've got the Bakerloo and the Piccadilly lines, and they're famous for their older stock trains built over 50 years ago. So, you know, they've got that classic sound. The 1992 stock on the Central line kind of sounds like a washing machine, so definitely spend some time on that. Although that line is quite busy because it goes right through the centre of London, so definitely don't go on it during rush hour. The Jubilee line is also a really good, interesting line. Definitely go on this line, especially between Canary Wharf and Westminster, as for some reason, that part of the line just reminds me of Cyberpunk. I know, but it just does. You know, it's got that really modern feel, and the VF drive from the 1996 stock is so nice. The 2009 stock on the Victoria line accelerates really quickly. And you've also got the sub-service lines, like the District and Circle lines, but I think they're rather boring, so don't go on it unless you want to, only once. You've also got the DLR as well, the Docklands Lights Railway. I recommend going on this around Canary Wharf and try to sit at the front as you get awesome views of the Canary Wharf skyline. The Elizabeth line, in my opinion, is a bit overrated, but definitely go on the Elizabeth line if you have time. And I also recommend going on the London buses, as you've also got the awesome Boris bus, named after Boris Johnson, who was the Mayor of London, before kind of failing as Prime Minister. Yeah. The only thing is, I don't recommend going on a bus right in the centre of London. So, you know, around Piccadilly Circus, Oxford Circus, that sort of area. Maybe go to Zone 2 to do the buses, you know, like maybe around Lewisham, that sort of area, as that's the roads are a lot faster than in the centre of London. Lastly, the big no-no in London in terms of transport. Do not drive in the centre of London. Just don't. Don't even rent a car in general. You've got to pay a ridiculous amount of money to ULEZ and Sadiq Khan, and it's not worth it at all. All of this transport can be bought by a travel card, which you can access by the ticket machines at the underground stations. I believe they accept cash and card. Or you could get an Oyster card, or even better, you can use a contactless payment card on the yellow reader at a ticket gate, provided it accepts your card, of course, because obviously it varies depending on what your card type is. And lastly, the prices on the London travel card and going on the underground, it's actually not too bad. It's obviously a bit more expensive than a lot of cities, but I think it's so worth it. So yeah, I do think it's reasonable. So definitely spend a few hours on here. Okay, so after spending some quality time on our transport, it's now lunchtime. So, where do you go for lunch? Well, being honest, I honestly just recommend McDonald's. Yeah, you heard me right. I honestly think the quality of food in McDonald's is very good in UK compared to a lot of countries, and the price of a Big Mac is actually not too bad, I guess. If you want something a bit more British though, as opposed to an American fast food chain, I recommend going into Tesco's or Sainsbury's and getting a meal deal. They are extremely good value for money. I think in the past they used to be £3, but they're now £3.50 to £4 due to inflation. But I still think that is very good value for money. In a meal deal, you usually get a choice of a mains, usually a sandwich such as cheese and onion, which is my favourite, egg and cress, tuna and cucumber, for example, and so much more. You also get a choice of a snack, so usually a large bag of crisps, and a 500ml bottle of a drink, such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Iron Brew, Ribena, Vimto, or even just a bottle of water. Although I don't recommend water, as it's just, why are you going to get water instead of a Iron Brew, which is a very Scottish thing, by the way. But you get it all over the UK, so it's very good. I mean, if you want water, just drink some tap water, as tap water is actually very safe to drink in London. And don't just get any old meal deal. Do spend a few minutes and really look at what you get, as they're all the same price, of course. So try to find a triple sandwich if you can, or look at all the flavours. Really look at what you really want. Now, if you want to go to a proper British pub or restaurant, but you don't want to spend a painful amount of money on pub meals, I personally recommend Wetherspoons. Now, Wetherspoons is a definition of a typical stereotypical British pub. Typical stereotypical. Oh, okay. You can get meals and a drink combined for about £8 to £9 in Wetherspoons, which I think is not too bad, especially because most normal restaurants are like double that price in the UK. It's ridiculous. You can also, of course, experience a pint of beer or a lager in London for a cheap price. Wetherspoons do a variety of food from curries, burgers, all-day brunches, fish and chips, chicken, and so much more. So do go to Wetherspoons if you want to. There's hundreds in the UK, and there's probably at least 50 in London, so do have a look around them. Right, let's now discuss what the best things to do in London are. Firstly, I recommend going to some of London's museums. For example, you've got the Natural History Museum, the British Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Imperial War Museum, and my personal favourite, the Science Museum. The best thing about all these museums is that they are all completely free. Although a lot of museums will ask you to donate some money if you can, but this is not mandatory. As well as that, some museums require you to book beforehand, but again, this is free. One museum which you do have to pay for is the London Transport Museum. I think it costs £24 per person for admission, which is a bit steep, but you've got to consider that the others are free. I've actually never been to this museum before, so I can't say if it's any good or not, but definitely go in here if it rings any bells. I also believe that children are free to enter this museum as well, which is quite cool. As well as the museums, I actually recommend going to the Olympic Park in Stratford, North East London, and having a nice walk around this park, as it's very interesting and has good structures. In the Olympic Park, you've also got the Olympic swimming pool, which is a great place to swim in. Another place I recommend is Canary Wharf. This is my favourite part of London, because you've got so many awesome tall buildings such as One Canada Square. There's also a massive underground shopping centre there where you can explore the place and get a bit lost. Another place I recommend in London is Bank, because Bank is in the city of London and is where the older financial district is. Definitely take a look around and look at the old buildings and look around Leadenhall Market. I also recommend venturing away from Zones 1 and 2 and exploring the nearby areas of Bromley, Croydon and Wimbledon, because there's more to London than just Zone 1 and 2. Another place I recommend going to is Oxford Circus, as that's where the main action is. It's where the stereotypical Londony part of London is. It's very busy and it's full of character. And now, I'm going to mention the places that you shouldn't visit in London. First of all, I don't recommend a lot of these tourist traps such as the London Eye. I personally think that the London Eye is a bit meh, and it just doesn't give you the same thrill as going up a tall building such as the Shard. So definitely avoid the London Eye, in my opinion. I also don't really recommend Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. The closest you can get to it is Westminster Bridge. Westminster Tube Station, in my opinion, is far more interesting. And finally, the big no-no in London is Buckingham Palace. God help me. This place is constantly full of stupid tourists who have no idea what London is really like. 99.9% of the time, the royal family are not even in Buckingham Palace. Please, just visit everywhere, but not Buckingham Palace. I also recommend taking a selfie of yourself, but at Piccadilly Circus or Oxford Circus, not Buckingham Palace. And now, it's now dinner time. So, what should you have for dinner? Well, I recommend going to a fish and chip shop. There are literally hundreds of these across London, although you've got to be very careful with fish and chips because a lot of them are extremely greasy and nasty, and you don't want to go to those places. Make sure to Google the best fish and chip shops in London and check the website and reviews, because you don't want a bad experience with fish and chips. Of course, they don't just do fish and chips, they also do burgers, pasties, sausages, chicken, and pies. Now, one thing which I don't recommend going to is a kebab shop because I dread to see how they make them. Some are extremely dodgy and lack hygiene, so do not go to a kebab shop. There's better places to go to. Another place I don't recommend going to is pizza places or like pizza takeaways because pizzas are so overpriced in London and the UK just in general. I just don't understand why or how. Literally, most 10 to 12 inch pizzas will literally cost you like 16 to 17, 18 pounds. That is literally ridiculous money. I can get 4 to 5 meal deals for that price. Anyways, in most countries, pizzas are like half the price, maybe up to 2/3 of the price, at a stretch 3/4. So yeah, I just don't get why pizzas are so expensive in the UK. And besides, pizzas in the UK, I've always found them to just be so dry and tasteless anyways. They honestly taste like cardboard, especially Domino's. Basically, just avoid pizzas, just stick to fish and chips, because pizzas are just never good in this country. And now, I'm just going to give you a few tips about certain things in London, because I think it's very important for you guys to know about this before travelling to this mega city. Firstly, the crime. The crime in London overall, I would say is actually not too bad. I would just say stay away from certain areas in the evenings. The biggest type of crime in London are the chavs, I would say. You may see a group of chavs and they do look a bit suspicious half the time. So I would just say just avoid the chavs and just don't speak to them because, you know, you don't want anything bad to happen to you by these chavs because, you know, you just don't. Number 2, beggars. Overall, it's not as bad in London as a lot of other cities, especially New York. New York is bad for beggars, but you do get beggars, especially on the London Underground. Again, my advice would be just to ignore them because most of the time they'll just ask for money, food, or cigarettes, and the latter of the three no one should be having anyways. But just avoid beggars because you can never trust them, I'm afraid. Number 3, toilets. A lot of toilets, you sadly have to pay for them in London. And I know you have to do this in a lot of other countries as well, in big cities, but London is not good for this. And I just think it's simply out of order, and I really don't agree with this. Because why should you have to pay just to go to the toilet? It just baffles me, it really does. But don't worry, because if you keep walking, you'll easily find a free toilet, because there's loads in London. Number 4, a bit of an obvious one, but some of you may not know this. So, cars drive on the left in London. So when crossing the road, look to the right first, then to the left. Actually, usually they will display this on the road. You know, they'll have signs saying, look right, and then have an arrow saying, pointing to the right. They'll say that beforehand. And number 5, talking about roads, you are actually allowed to jaywalk in London. So, you don't have to wait for the green man at traffic lights, for example, when crossing. You can cross, technically, whenever you want, providing it's safe, of course. And as well as that, you can cross anywhere on the road, not at a designated place. So, I mean, this doesn't apply to motorways, but any other A road or just a main road in general, you can cross wherever you want. Right, it's the evening before your flight back home. So, you want to do some shopping to remember your time in London. So, where do you go? Well, first of all, do not go to the horrible, tiny, tatty, little, disgusting, overpriced, souvenir, crappy shops that you find in the whole of the centre of London. They are just full of complete, utter crap. Seriously, just avoid these places. They sell rubbish which has nothing to do with London, in my opinion. I personally recommend going to the Westfield shopping centres. There's actually 2 of them in London. One is in White City in the west of London, and the other one is in Stratford in the east of London. Go to one and spend about an hour or so exploring the place and buying stuff that you genuinely want to buy. Do be aware that at UK airports currently, you cannot take liquids of more than 100 millilitres through security due to some nonsense, which I don't really understand. So you can't take any of our drinks back home, I'm afraid, unless you want to spend a painful amount of money on the other side of security. And that's another thing, just don't buy anything at Heathrow Airport or whichever airport you're flying from, because it's ridiculously overpriced on the other side of security. I mean, they do it because, you know, where else would you get your food and drink if you don't have any food with you? So that's the reason why it's so expensive. But my advice would be to take food with you. And in terms of drinks, tap water is free in the UK. So ask for tap water at the airport because they have no right to say no. And that is my guide to London. So, thank you so much for watching. My name is Great Western Transportation. And I will see you, I don't know when. Bye.